Hello, I'm Tony Guida. This is My New York. Be awesome. Be a book nut. That imperative from Dr. Seuss fits perfectly our guest today. He is awesome. He is a book nut. He is Christopher Lehman Haupt, whose distinguished career as an editor, publisher, reviewer, and author continues apace. And we'll find out what Mr. Lehman Haupt is up to these days. Next. How special it is to have as our guest today Christopher Lehman Haupt. Welcome.
Thank you.
Since I mentioned Dr. Seuss, Theodore Geisel, it occurs to me, have you ever met him? Do you review his books?
I never met him. I don't believe I ever reviewed his books, but I remember from childhood his first, which was, and to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street, and being absolutely fascinated by it. And I remember the King's Stilts, and the one about the 500 hats of Bartholomew Cubbins, which I think was number 3. And I was thrilled by all of them as a kid. So he got an early start on me.
I heard your daughter, Rachel, talk about in your days as a reviewer, among your chores was at the end of the year, I guess, to come up with a list of children's books, good children's books. And she said you would ask her for her opinion. I imagine Dr. Seuss was on some of those lists.
I don't remember. I did it every year for 36 years, and it became children's picture books as opposed to children's reading books. I referred to her in the column as the acid test, and really she pointed the way to some of them that have become classics, like the series called The Stupid Step Out, where Mr. and Mrs. Stupid, and silly, wonderfully funny.
And Rachel is a writer on her own.
She is indeed, and she's imminently coming to New York to promote the update of her first and main book, which is In Her Own Sweet Time, which is a kind of story of becoming a mother, a single mother by choice, and the revised edition, which she's hoping to come to the city next week and promote, includes our grandchild, the result of all her research, really, basically.
Well, tell her to stop by here. We'd love to talk to her.
I will indeed.
Speaking of Rachel, it leads me to talk a little bit or ask you a little bit about the lineage. It seems to me, if I look at you and your background, that you were destined to be a man of books. There's a poet in the family. There's a grandfather or father who spoke 26 languages. There's another person who was knighted as a scholar. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, I ran from it as long as I could. I remember in 1938 there was a horrendous ice storm. It might have been 39, but the city was absolutely paralyzed by ice, and I was so inspired by it that when it came to show and tell, I held forth for much too long on the glory of the ice storm, and the refrain was, "Get the scrapers, scrape it off," and it was sent to my mother's father, who was Sir Herbert John Clifford Grierson, who some people hold responsible for both sailing to Byzantium by his good friend William Butler Yeats, and The Wasteland by Eliot, who dedicated inscribed an edition to him, which disappeared shortly after his death at the age of 94. I'm talking about my grandfather's, not Eliot's. But he sent me a £1 note, and that's the first money I made as a 5 or 6 year old writing it. But I ran from it for a long time after that. But it
ran from it in what sense?
Well, ran from becoming a writer. I mean, I went to the ethical culture school, and when I got to the upper school, they came and said, "Well, you'll want to work on the newspaper." And I said, "Whatever gave you that idea?" But I did end up in college working in where I graduated from high school, which was a prep school in Vermont, being the editor of the literary magazine and then the co-editor of the Swarthmore Phoenix, as it was called, helping it to rise out of the ashes.
Who was the poet in the family?
I'm not sure who that's. Oh, my
Your
father's
grandmother?
mother,
Your father's mother.
Teresa Haupt, her name was originally, and she's the cause of the merger between the Lamans and the Haupts. Some years after they were married in around 1900, and my father was born in '03, and his sister was '04, and I think they changed the name from Lehman to Lehman Haupt after that. And no one's ever been able to figure out quite why. The urban legend is that she wanted part of the action being a published poet. And one of her poems, they were fiercely dedicated to the cause of the South Tyrol, which was handed to Italy as part of the settlement at Versailles. And they wanted independence for the South Tyrol. And she actually has a poem on one of their banknotes, a poem celebrating the idea that they should be a free state or return to Austria, as the case may be. But she was a playwright. She wrote children's plays, and she was a considerable force. But the Lehman side on my father's cousin, I think, is the English novelist, Rosamund Lehman, who wrote Dusty Answer, I think it was called, was a huge bestseller in England. And her sister Beatrix Lehman, I think, was a London actress who I think played the first English production of Blanche Dubois. And John Lehman, their brother, was he's written the family history, and he knew absolutely everybody from Gore Vidal to John Betjeman. It was amazing.
So it's in your DNA.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
You told me earlier you're working on a number of books at the moment. One of which is going to be, one day, a memoir of your years reviewing at the Times. Now, that's 36 years. And I can't wait to see this compressed between the covers of a book. Tell me what you can about that so far.
Yeah, well, the idea has always been, for a long time, would be to take a dozen, 18, I don't know, particularly exemplary reviews of various things to illustrate somebody that I knew, an awkwardness of having to review a fairly close friend, which we had to do in the early days because they didn't assign to outsiders. In fact, when I suggested that idea to Abe Rosenthal, he looked at the heavens and said, "That's where I'll be before that ever happens," as only Abe could. But then shortly afterwards, they began to bring in outside people to review, Times people especially. But I had to review, for instance, Barbara Gelb's So Short a Time, which was awkward and
Yeah, at the least. I hope you. Well, I was about to say I hope you liked it. I don't. That's not my hope, but that's very awkward to have to be a critic of your boss's family's work.
Yeah, well, it was awkward.
Yes.
Sure. But anyway, the idea would be to take these reviews and hope that each of them would tell a story about some aspect of the Times, some aspect of the job, something about learning to write a review, which only took me 20 years. And I would have a serious purpose, I think, of the distinction between reviewing and criticism. I think that we could never pretend, although some of us did, that we had read everything by the writer that we were reading or knew everything about the subject that we were discoursing on.
Right.
That's a ridiculous untruth. So my theory was to create a kind of intelligent reader ombudsman that the reader would be able to get to know and say, oh, if he likes it, then I know I'll hate it because I know what he's like and I know how wrong he is on this, this, and this, which I felt was just as important a function as being able to recommend something and saying, you're going to like this. And so the distinction between reviewing and criticism was important to me.
I don't want you to reveal a lot about the forthcoming book here. I respect your right to publish it when you can, but it sure raises questions. I'm very curious about, let's say, the 12, 15, 18 reviews. Yeah. Have you selected those? Or
I've begun to go through. I mean, the first one, which made all sorts of errors, like I referred to something having been written by the late so-and-so, and the Times copy desk would quickly tell you that no late so-and-so could write anything or do anything,
Right.
since he was late,
Yeah.
or she. But the story of how I got the job involves a character who is still relevant today, Sidney Zion. One of his great lines lives on and has taken a slightly different meaning. He once made the crack when, I think, the Donald Trump was having trouble with real estate in Atlantic City. Sidney said, he misses the restraining hand of Roy Cohn. And they were very close, and apparently
Yes.
Cohn was responsible for Trump's dealings with labor, where Cohn had the connections and so forth. And
Would that the restraining hand had restrained him?
now it's taken on a
This year.
different meaning. It was meant to be ironic, but it's getting less ironic by the day. Yeah. But Sidney, I could write a book about Sidney, and he, in a sense, he got me the job in the first place. That is, I was on the Sunday Book Review, and Elliot Fremont Smith, who had replaced Orville Prescott, these are names out of some archaeological era, we became. I had met Rosenthal actually at a birthday party for Sidney, which he gave for himself every fall. It was November 19th, I think, his birthday. And it was the time that Talisa's book, the parts of it were appearing in Esquire, and the story of the young man, The Kingdom and the Power,
Kingdom
the
and
book,
Power, of course, of course.
the story of the young man who was a stringer at, I think, at City College, had to list all of the people who got awards, which were going to appear in agate type, which no one would read. Got so bored that he wrote the name of Jake Barnes, the hero of Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises, for getting a prize for doing something above and beyond valor, and
Right.
everybody got the joke. And Abe found out about it and shook his fist at the heavens again and said, that young man will never work for the Times. And that was the feature of the piece that Talisa's segment of that book ran in Esquire magazine. So everybody was talking about it. I met Rosenthal on a Sunday when the Times had run an absolutely egregiously biased description of a Vietnam protest. This has to have been 67, 68 or so. And I'd had a drink or two, and I met Rosenthal, and I said, Mr. Rosenthal, I think it's shocking that you would ban a kid for a practical joke and then run a piece like that. And he looked at me and sort of clenched both of his fists, and then he said, as only Abe could, you're right. And he turned away, and I kept, pushing it, and he finally turned away. But he knew me at that point, and there was a, cut to about a year later, there was a book by two writers for the Village Voice, who'd like to ride Abe in the pages of the Village Voice. And we assigned, I think it might have been 38 Witnesses, the book that Abe wrote about the Kitty Genovese case
Yes.
in Queens, has had created a lot of controversy, was assigned to one of these people who Abe felt was harassing him. And I saw him in the elevator, and I was working on the book, and he gave me this look, and I quickly went to Sidney, my rabbi on the third floor, and I said, I think Abe thinks I'm responsible for having assigned that book to whoever wrote it. And Sidney grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and dragged me to Arthur Gelb and said, tell him, save yourself. And so I did, and Arthur grabbed me and said, tell Abe. So I did, and that it wasn't I, and he said, it's a conspiracy. But that really was when I made the connection with Abe, and I think that had a lot to do with my finally getting the Daily Book Review job, not out of a reward, but simply because he had noticed me.
Yeah.
But the story with Sidney goes on and on. I mean, there was, one of the stories will be, it goes, I don't want to
Well,
consume
Sidney's
the
a
rest of the
fascinating
time.
character.
But he had written a book, and Sidney he wrote a novel called Markers, and Sidney believed that that's how everything worked. A marker was a debt that you had to someone, and Sidney would establish markers all over the place at the Times and then call them in. And I finally got the job of reviewing one of Sidney's books, Read All About It, which was a collection of his journalism. But I got to hear Sidney's version of what was happening, and Arthur Gelb's version of what was happening, and the culture editor's version of what was happening, and it was all different. They were all, And I mean, it's worth a book in itself. It tells you a lot about the times. And anyway,
We're waiting for it. We're waiting for it, Christopher.
right.
What other? Give us a little bit of an idea what else you're working on now that is some stage of development.
Well, for some years, I mean, I happen to have had I don't know whether it was good or bad luck, but my father, although we never called him that, was a monuments man.
Ah, yes, of course.
Yeah, he worked
that phrase became
Recently.
popular because of the movie recently. But these were archivists who looked through World War II papers. Yeah, you can explain it better than I.
Well, technically they worked for part of the military government in Berlin, which was called the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives Division, Office of Military Government, Berlin sector. And their original, as the movie illustrated, and the movie was based on a book by a former Texas oilman named Robert Edsel, who took them as a cause and has made them heroes. They were kind of annoying people during actually the Battle of Berlin and after Normandy, but they were the people that kind of followed the army around to rescue art that the Nazis, or in some cases the Russians, had confiscated.
Mm-hmm. And your father was a quote-unquote...
But he was not part of that. His assignment was to kind of look after those artists who were coming out of hiding that Hitler and the Nazis had condemned as being degenerate artists, and they were any abstract artists, and as is advertised at the current Picasso exhibit, either just having closed, that he was and he managed to go on working in Paris despite the German occupation, but he was anything abstract, non-heroic, representational was bad. And my father's job was really to kind of succor them and help them eat and live. And is a fascinating and, again, too complicated story because it involves cultural history in Europe and the so-called scandal of the CIA having funneled money through the famous J.M. Kaplan Fund to support the Congress of Cultural Freedom and Encounter magazine. But it turns out that my father was instrumental in getting that program going in the interest of fighting the Russians, who were literally feeding the German artists and trying to convert them to communism. And my father said, we have to fight fire with fire. We can't say freedom of expression. That's elitist. And so he was deeply involved, and that's a part of the story.
And you lived in Berlin for...
And I lived in Berlin from January of 47 to March of 48. And I remember almost every day. I mean, there's a lot I didn't understand. And the book begins with, in the Holocaust Museum about 10 years ago, when I discovered the exhibit devoted to the so-called Wannsee Conference, which occurred in January 1942 and was a secret, and it was dedicated to the final solution of the Jewish problem. But I looked at it, and I had vaguely heard of it, but Wannsee meant to me the lake on which I learned to sail in 1947 in the spring. And you could rent a boat for 10 cents an hour, boats that had been confiscated from German owners, and Americans could have them. And I mean, I would go out alone and I would drift, and without knowing that I was drifting in the shadow, practically, literally, of the villa where the Wannsee Conference occurred. So there was this collision of these two senses of awareness. I mean, what I knew about the Holocaust in April 1947, which happens to be the month when the minutes of the Wannsee Conference were actually discovered during the Nuremberg trials, when the one person who disobeyed the orders to destroy the minutes, whose name was ironically Martin Luther from the Foreign Office, came to light, and the whole thing was revealed.
Does this book have a title yet?
Yeah, it's called Re-Vision, What I Didn't See, Berlin, Germany, 1947-48.
Okay, and as long as I'm asking about titles, how about the other one we were talking about? Is that
Review.
Review?
The New York Times,
Okay.
1965.
So we'll know what to look for. You are still editorial director of Delphinium Books?
No, I'm not. I'm not. I gave that up about 4 years ago. I had an interesting 5-year run, but I was getting more and more of an urge to get to work on these various memoirs, and it was the job was interfering with the job, so I resigned.
Just occurred to me to ask you about what kind of an imprint that was or is, and the kind of writers you saw coming along, the kind of work you saw coming along, anything that really caught your attention specifically.
Yeah, we published it had a crossword puzzle title which was completely inapt to the stories, but they were by a young woman who teaches at Montana State in Bozeman, which is kind of a literary center. Tom McGuane lived there for a while, and perhaps most obscurely and yet in a way most significantly, it was the place that Persig and his son are heading on the motorcycle in that book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Exactly.
Their destination is Bozeman, but she teaches there, and she published a very good collection of distinctly Western story. They have a kind of Western mentality. And she is now prepared another book. It's not going to be published by Delphinium. It's published by a small Seattle outfit, but I've just finished reading them. It's called All I Want Is What You've Got. And they're terrific. They are.
Tell us her name again, in case we...
Her name is Glenn Chamberlain. And I said, let's find out her middle name so we know that she's a she and not a he. So they told me her name is Glenn Ross Chamberlain, which did no help at all.
No help at all.
But it's really an exciting the work. Yeah.
I want to talk a little. You mentioned you were at a point at the Times you were the chief obituary writer, and it brings back memories for me. I'm afraid I have to plead guilty to not remembering you as in that role, but the man who became known as Mr. Bad News,
Alden Whitman.
Alden Whitman.
Yeah.
And I find this fascinating development in the Alden Whitman story. I mean, you can tell our viewers the large shadow he cast on the world from that perch, and then I want to interject this little story.
Well, he was an extraordinary researcher. I mean, I'm not sure, I can't say that I've read it, but he was the one that actually was able to write and knew that there were fleur-de-lis designs on the wallpaper of de Gaulle's bathroom. Now, it's too good to be true, but the point is that he would have found out. He would go off and he would do the kind of research, and he really redesigned the whole notion of at least for an American audience, the whole notion of the obituary and where you could go and what you could discover.
And with this idea that I'm going to interview you, you're a famous person, you're worthy of an obit in the Times, and it's going to nothing you tell me now is going to see print until after you're dead. And from that, he would get very candid. It would seem he got very candid and interesting conversations with his subjects.
Well, yeah, and of course he also got. I mean, again, it's more urban legend, although I heard it from somebody involved that he was taken by somebody in Chicago just to pay a call on Saul Bellow. And when he opened the door and Saul Bellow realized who he thought it was the angel of death and nearly fainted and did not want to be interviewed. And many people didn't. Apparently, particularly great chefs did not want to be.
Really?
They were, for reasons I don't understand, they particularly resisted what they call being interviewed, or what was known as advancers. That was the expression
yes.
for the obits that you put in the bank because you didn't want to be caught with only 3 or 4 hours to do, for instance, as they had to do Jacqueline Kennedy. They had to do her on deadline. Sorry about the expression, but that's the way it is. And it's a nightmare. I mean, it takes weeks and really sometimes months to do the kind of research for a major figure.
Well, a curious thing that came across my desk years ago when Alden Whitman died. Of course, Gay Talese wrote a famous piece in Esquire magazine about Alden. And Alden Whitman, now retired from the Times in the late 80s or 90s or whatever, and dies. And in the Times, the obit, at least in my edition of the paper, was unsigned, and it was by the Associated Press. And I thought that was just awful. And actually, I was had the occasion to be on television in those days, and I wrote a story about it, saying, "Isn't it ironic that the man who made such a name as an obituary writer for the New York Times, when he died, the Times didn't have someone like Alden Whitman to
Whitman's Whitman, right?
write his."
Exactly.
Anyway,
Well, there may be more than meets the eye to that story because
you would know.
Abe was disturbed about Whitman's politics, and I think that, again, he's supposed to have said, and I didn't hear it, and it was never written down. You know, nobody who has died is going to have a byline in the Times. Although I think it might have been after Bob Hope's obituary appeared by someone who had died. But it was everyone thought that's so that Whitman will never appear in the Times again because Abe didn't like his politics. When Abe felt strongly about your politics, he felt strongly.
Well, it is delightful to have you here to talk about what books you're working on. I'm inclined to wonder if you have any time to read with all this. Is there any particular book on your nightstand right now?
I have what I have to credit the novelist Norman Rush with the term. I have a bucket list.
The
books that I never got around to reading. I'm on the second volume of the new translation is of Proust's In Search of Lost Time. I'm about to plunge into Middlemarch, which I'm embarrassed never to have read, and Stendhal. And the trouble with being a daily book reviewer and having to review what's coming out daily is that you fall behind. I remember when I was offered a job at the Times Book Review, the first thing that came into my head was, I never read The Faerie Queene, which is about irrelevant a thought as you could possibly have, but anyway.
Well, look, we hope you get to the bucket list, but more important and more important for us is that you finish those books.
Thanks.
And come back here and talk about them when they're published.
I'll work, I'm going to do my best as long as my wits hold up.
Well, thank you. Christopher Lamenhow.
Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. We will see you next week.